My name is Felisa, and at the age of 32, I thought I had already made up my mind. 2 years ago, when I got a promotion at work, everything seemed to fall into place. The salary increase was significant enough that I was finally able to breathe a sigh of relief. Pay the mortgage, live comfortably, and even help others. That's when I decided to start supporting my parents financially. Felisa, honey, you don't have to do this, Mom said when I first told her about setting up monthly transfers. Mom, I want to. I'm making good money now and I want to help, I replied, already pulling out my phone to set up an automatic payment of $1,500 in my banking app. Dad was standing next to me, his eyes shining with pride, and I thought it was gratitude. We raised a good Felisa, he said to his mother, putting his arm around her shoulders. Those first few months were touching. Every time the money was credited to their account, they called to thank me. Mom kept telling them how lucky they were to have such a caring daughter, and Dad joked that they now had a sugar daughter instead of a sugar daddy. We laughed, and I was glad that I could help the people who raised me. But you know what they say, no good deed goes unpunished. Well, I was going to learn that lesson the hard way. It all started small. Thank you calls became less frequent, and then stopped altogether. At first, I didn't mind. It became a routine, a familiar part of my budget. But then the requests started coming in. Felisa, honey, Mom called one day. Our coffee maker just broke down. You won't believe what noise it made. We thought the house was going to collapse. Could you help us buy a new one? Of course, I agreed. It's just a coffee maker, right? But then came the iron, and then the washing machine. Each request was bigger than the previous one, and each one was accompanied by more and more detailed stories about why they needed it right now. I still remember the day when I finally spoke. I just finished a particularly stressful week at work, and Mom called again. Honey, we've been thinking. We would like to upgrade our TV. It's old, and the pixels are already fading. A new smart TV would be perfect. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and said, trying to keep my voice steady, Mom, I need you to understand something. I don't print money in the basement. I earn them. And while I like helping you, I think we need to slow down the shopping. The silence on the other end was deafening. I understand, Mom finally said. Her voice was icy. Well, I wouldn't want to burden you with our needs. The line ended before I could answer. The silence that followed was unlike anything I had experienced with my family before. Weeks passed without a single call or message from my parents. The traditional Sunday dinners I grew up eating suddenly stopped, and my invitations went unanswered. Thank God for my sister Ines. At the age of 27, she had just married her longtime boyfriend Durand in a beautiful ceremony that I helped pay for. She became my only window into our parents' world during those quiet months. You won't believe this, Ines said one day during a phone call, barely able to contain her laughter. Mom and Dad are acting like you've committed some terrible crime. They keep talking about how you left them just because you didn't buy them a TV. Really? I couldn't help but laugh. The TV? You'd think I'd refuse to donate a kidney or something. I know, right? But you know how they can be. Do you remember when I didn't call them for 3 days during my honeymoon? Mom acted like I'd moved to Mars. I rolled my eyes, but deep down I was worried about this estrangement. I didn't want to quarrel with my parents, but I also wasn't going to turn into an endless source of money. I thought financial support was a gesture of love. But it seems to have become a matter of course for them. As Thanksgiving approached, I decided that was enough. I'm tired of this silence, of the tension, of feeling like my parents are strangers with whom I can no longer communicate without feeling a hidden reproach. I didn't want our fight to drag on until the end of the year, overshadowing the Christmas holidays. Armed with a homemade apple pie, my dad's favorite, and carefully selected gifts, I showed up at their doorstep without warning. When my mother opened the door, I saw a struggle in her eyes, and old resentment collided with the natural maternal instinct to let her daughter home. She hesitated for a moment, but then stepped aside. "Come in, Felisa," she said, trying not to meet my eyes. Dad appeared behind her, also looking a little stiff. After a brief hesitation, he sighed and stepped aside to let me pass. Inez and Durant were already sitting in the living room. The atmosphere was tense, as if everyone was waiting for the first one to break the icy silence. I put the pie on the table, unwrapped the presents, smiled and tried to make my appearance look as natural as possible. The conversation was strained for the first few minutes, but then, gradually, a familiar warmth began to seep through the chill of alienation. We recalled old family jokes, discussed who would cook what for the festive dinner, and laughed at Dad's stories about his work colleagues. Over the turkey and stuffing, the conversation flowed easier than I expected. And then Dad cleared his throat and, as if throwing a bomb into the air, said, "We've been thinking. What if we all go to Europe early next year?" I looked up from my plate, blinking in surprise. "To Germany, especially," Mom added briskly. "After Christmas." "We've been discussing this for a long time," Inez supported her. "It would be great to bring the whole family together, Felisa. You should go too." I was sitting there, my fork frozen in the air. Despite our recent differences, the idea of a family trip sounded appealing. This could be a chance to restore our relationship. After a moment's thought, I nodded. "You know, that sounds great. I wouldn't mind a vacation." We spent the rest of the evening discussing possible directions. Mom, beaming, took out her iPad and showed me dozens of tourist spots that she had already explored. That evening, we became a real family again. The next day, I took 2 weeks off from work. I could already imagine the snow-covered streets of German cities, cozy cafes, and the aromas of hot mulled wine. In the following weeks, Sunday dinners resumed, and each meeting turned into long discussions about the upcoming trip. December has come into its own, covering the city with a blanket of snow and filling the air with a sense of celebration. I spent a few weekends choosing gifts, determined to make this year special. I bought an expensive cashmere sweater for my mom, which she had been dreaming about for a long time. Dad got the latest model of his favorite smartwatch. Inez and Durantu, a high-end coffee machine for their new home. When Christmas Eve arrived, I called a taxi and went to my parents', loaded with carefully wrapped gifts. The house looked festive, the windows twinkled with garlands, a Christmas wreath hung on the door, and the aroma of cinnamon and fresh pastries wafted from the kitchen. Inez's car was already parked in the driveway. "Merry Christmas!" Mom exclaimed joyfully, opening the door for me and hugging me. It was almost like the good old days. The room smelled of pine needles, candles, and warm chocolate. The Christmas tree sparkled with toys that we had collected over the years, and the fireplace crackled comfortably, filling the living room with soft light. The exchange of gifts began happily. My gifts were greeted with delight. Mom immediately wrapped herself in a new sweater, Dad tried on a watch with a smile, and Inez and Durant thanked me for the coffee machine. But when it was my turn, I noticed that their gifts to me were, well, just on duty. An ordinary scarf. A gift card to a store I rarely visited. I smiled and thanked them, reminding myself that Christmas isn't just about presents. After a few glasses of wine, the atmosphere at the table changed. Something subtly condensed in the air. Mom and Dad exchanged glances. Inez and Durant suddenly became very interested in their plates. "So, Felisa," Mom finally said, her voice sounding as sweet as it usually did when she asked for a favor. We were discussing our trip to Europe. I already knew that this was the preface to something more. "We have found an amazing package deal for all 5 of us," Dad continued, picking up the topic with unnatural enthusiasm. I looked at them warily. "Really? And what's so special about him? Well, Mom smiled meaningfully. This is a very profitable offer, with accommodation in excellent hotels, guided tours, and full board. But there's one caveat, Inez put in, trying not to look me in the eye. It costs a little more than we expected. Dad hesitated. So we thought maybe you could cover the expenses? The silence at the table was so thick that it seemed you could hear the snow melting outside the window. I slowly set the glass down on the table, feeling the warmth that had been warming me all evening evaporate. Do you want me to pay for the whole family's trip? I asked, choosing my words carefully. Mom hesitated, but then took the initiative. Well, that's not really true. We just thought it wouldn't be difficult for you to help a little. A little? I asked again. Dad coughed and looked away. It's a family trip, Felisa, Mom added softly. Don't you want us all to be together? I looked at Inez, but she only smiled faintly, avoiding my gaze. My heart started beating faster. Was it a genuine desire to spend time together? Or was I becoming their bank account again? I nodded, waiting for more information about the route. But what I heard next hit me like a bucket of icy water. Since you're doing such a good job, Mom continued, her voice still as sweet as syrup, we thought it would be wise if you paid the travel expenses for everyone. The glass of wine froze halfway to my lips. I'm sorry, what? I asked in disbelief. Darling, Dad intervened, you're making good money now. Much more than Inez, Durant, your mother, and we are already retired. I set the glass down on the table, maybe a little too hard. Are you seriously asking me to pay for a European vacation for 5 people? We're not asking, dear, Mom corrected, as if that might soften the meaning of her words. We have already decided that this is how it should be. You can afford it. I slowly shifted my gaze to Inez, hoping that she would support me, point out to my parents how absurd this idea is. But instead, she just shrugged her shoulders slightly. We've really discussed this, she said calmly. That makes the most sense, Felisa. You have the highest salary among us all. I blinked at him. This is crazy, I breathed, pushing my hair back. I'm happy to pay for my trip, but I'm not going to finance a family vacation. Do you have any idea how much it will cost? Don't be selfish, Felisa, Mom suddenly snapped, her sweet tone evaporating. After all we've done for you. I laughed, but it was full of bewilderment and bitterness. Selfish? I asked again. I've been sending you $1,500 every month for 2 years. I helped pay for Inez's wedding. I've bought you all the appliances you asked for. How does that make me selfish? The temperature in the room seemed to drop by several degrees. Mom stood up, her face flushed with anger, or perhaps wine. If you don't help your family get through this experience together, then you can leave, she said, pointing to the door. We don't need selfish people at our Christmas party. I looked at Dad, hoping that he would say something intelligible, that he would at least try to soften the situation. But he just nodded in agreement. Your mother is right. If you don't contribute properly to this family, maybe you really should leave. Inez and Durant sat silently at the table, bystanders to this scene. Their betrayal hurt more than their parents' words. The taxi home that Christmas night was a haze of tears and anger. I couldn't believe that this was really happening, that my family had chosen a trip to Europe over me. When I got to my apartment, the decision came naturally. With shaking hands, I opened the banking app and canceled the monthly transfers to my mom's account. Then I wrote her a short message. Monthly transfers have been canceled. Merry Christmas. Her answer came almost instantly. It just proves what we already knew. You're selfish and greedy. Don't worry about contacting us anymore. I spent the rest of the night alternately crying and angry at myself for how things turned out. When did my generosity turn into a duty? When did she become an expectation, then a demand, and now the only measure of my value as a daughter? The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. I opened my laptop and started looking for travel packages. Not to Germany. To Hawaii. Within a few hours, I booked a room in a beautiful beach resort for February. If I'm going to spend thousands of dollars on a vacation, I muttered to myself, it's going to be on my own terms. The following weeks were eerily quiet. No calls from Mom or Dad. No messages from Inez. I threw myself into my work, into planning my solo trip. I avoided social media, knowing that I would probably see updates about their European adventure there. February came, and one day my curiosity got the better of me. I opened Inez's Instagram. There were photos there, bright, sunny, carefree. They posed against the backdrop of the Brandenburg Gate, walked through the old streets of Munich, ate in beer gardens, laughing and raising mugs with foaming drink. They looked happy. I felt a complex mix of emotions, the pain of not being there, and the relief of not being involved in this performance. While they were posting pictures from Munich and Berlin, I was boarding a plane to Honolulu. The moment I stepped onto the soft Hawaiian sand, felt its warm grains between my toes and breathed in the salty ocean air, I knew I had made the right choice. I lived in paradise for 2 weeks. I took surfing lessons, climbed steep trails that led to stunning views of turquoise waters, visited a traditional luau with fire dancing, and for the first time in a long time, I really relaxed. I became friends with other solo travelers, people who, like me, were looking for a break from something that weighed on them in their daily lives. It feels like you're taking a weight off your shoulders, said Lisa, a woman I met in yoga classes. Whatever you left behind, it was the right choice. She had no idea how right she was. Felisa, who boarded the plane back home, was different from the one who flew to Hawaii. I felt stronger. More confident in her boundaries. I've finally come to terms with my decision to distance myself from the toxic family dynamic. But life has a funny way of testing your resolve just when you start to feel at peace. A month has passed since my return. The tan was gradually fading, but my newfound sense of independence did not weaken. The work was going great. I signed up for evening pottery classes and joined a book club. I enjoyed life without family drama, without emotional blackmail, without constant demands disguised as requests. And then, one evening, the phone rang. I looked at the screen. Mom. I stared at the name for a long time, wondering if I should answer. We haven't spoken since that terrible Christmas dinner. Part of me wanted to ignore the call, leave everything in the past. But curiosity was stronger. Hello? I tried to keep my tone neutral. Felisa, Mom's voice didn't sound the same as usual. He was tense. A hidden desperation slipped through the familiar intonation. We need you to come. You are welcome. I was wary. Mom, I don't think that's a good idea. Please, she repeated, and there was something in her voice that I had never heard before. Fear. I should have said no. I had every right to say no. But instead, I heard myself saying, I'll be there in 30 minutes. The trip to their house seemed longer than usual. My mind was racing between options. Is someone sick? Did something happen to Inez? Or is this just another attempt to get money out of me? But Mom's voice was genuinely upset. When I arrived, I immediately realized that something was wrong. Their house looked different. A well-tended garden is usually overgrown with weeds. Dad's favorite car had disappeared from the driveway. Mom opened the door before I could knock. She looked older. Tired, exhausted. Dad was sitting in his armchair in the living room, staring into space. None of them offered me a drink or said, "How are you?" to the attendant. What's going on? I asked, standing in the doorway. Where's your car? Dad finally looked at me. His face was haggard. We had to sell it. I blinked at him. Sell it? Why? At that moment, Mom burst into tears. That in itself was disturbing, but what happened next turned out to be even worse. This is Inez and Durant, she said through her sobs. When we were in Germany. She sobbed convulsively. They went to Baden-Baden. They took my credit card. I already knew how the story would end. And lost all the money in the casino. I sat down. What does all the money mean? Dad pinched the bridge of his nose, shaking his head wearily. They've gambled away all our savings, Felisa. That's it. Every last cent, Mom added. My heart started pounding. Are you kidding? Mom looked up at me, her eyes red from crying. I wish it were like that. I tried to process what I'd heard. Wait a minute. How did this even happen? How did they get access to your money? Dad clenched his fists, his face contorted with impotent anger. We gave them a card to pay for the hotel, just in case of an emergency. They promised to be careful, Mom whispered. I closed my eyes. And you believed them? We thought they were just going sightseeing, Mom whispered, crumpling the napkin in her hands. But they went to the casino. I listened without blinking, but everything inside me tightened. We spent almost $50,000 in 2 days. It was like someone had punched me in the gut. $50,000? How is this even possible? Credit card limit, Mom replied faintly. Plus cash advances. We didn't even know until we came back and saw the bank statement. But it's a scam. I tried to find some kind of loophole. You can dispute these expenses. No, we can't, Dad said softly, looking up at me for the first time in the entire conversation. He looked like he had aged 10 years in the last week. We have given Inez permission to use the card in emergency cases. I was having a hard time digesting what I heard. And that's not all, he added after a pause. The next half hour was like a slowly unfolding horror movie. My parents took turns explaining how they found out that Durant had a gambling addiction. As it turned out, Inez knew about this, but had been hiding it from her family for years. To make matters worse, he seemed to have gotten her into gambling, too. She seemed so happy, Mom whispered, continuing to crumple the napkin in her hands. All these years with Durant. We thought they were perfect for each other. We had no idea Durant had lost his job, Dad added. His company found out about his addiction, and he was fired immediately. Now they're both drowning. I sat there trying to process what I had just heard. My sister. Practical, sensible Inez. The one who sided with my parents when they demanded that I pay for their European vacation. Now she was drowning in debt. I looked up. Why are you telling me all this? Although I already knew the answer. Mom leaned forward, her eyes pleading. Felice, dear. We need help. I stared at her in silence. The bank demands its money. We're retired. We don't have such funds. The word came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't soften it. But we're your parents. Mom's voice trembled, but indignation was already boiling in it. You have to help us. Should I? I slowly got up from my chair. Anger boiled inside me, hot and irreversible. I had to pay for a European vacation for the whole family. The vacation during which Inez and Durant stole $50,000 from you. We were just joking about the trip. Mom spoke quickly, as if she could erase the memory of my last months. We didn't mean what we said at Christmas. You know we love you. I chuckled. Do you love me? You kicked me out of Christmas dinner because I didn't pay for your vacation. You called me selfish and greedy. You have stopped all contact with me. Now do you want me to help you out? Your sister needs help, Dad said softly. She's a family. I clenched my fists. Where was that family loyalty when you all turned on me at Christmas? Where was she when Inez was sitting silently while you kicked me out? Why does it become a family only when you need something from me? Mom burst into tears again. Please, Felisa. We don't know what else to do. Your sister and Durant could lose their house. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Have you ever thought that maybe they should face the consequences of their actions? Mom flinched as if I had hit her. Felisa, but this is. Maybe by helping them out, you will only make the situation worse. Maybe they need real help, not just another blank check from me. So you just want your family to suffer? Mom's voice acquired that familiar hysterical note that appeared when something did not go according to her script. I looked at her. No, Mom. I want my family to take responsibility for their actions. She quickly wiped away her tears, and the pity in her eyes was replaced by anger. Get out. Stop it, she shouted. Just like at Christmas. If you don't want to help us, get out. I nodded slowly. Okay. I turned around and headed for the door. You're not our daughter anymore. She called after him. I froze for a second, but then I took a step forward. Dad didn't say anything. I left the house and slammed the door behind me. When I got to the car, my breathing was ragged and my hands were shaking. I got behind the wheel, clenched my fingers on the steering wheel and took a deep breath. And then. A year has passed since that fateful Christmas dinner that changed everything. During this time, I've learned more about family dynamics and personal boundaries than I ever wanted to. I also realized that sometimes the most difficult decisions turn out to be the only right ones. Through various relatives and mutual acquaintances, I monitored the situation in my family. Mom and Dad were eventually able to pay off their credit card debt, but it cost them their retirement. The comfort they were used to was a thing of the past. I rarely thought about that evening when I left their house and slammed the door behind me, but sometimes I remembered that moment. Not because I regretted my decision, I didn't. But because she was still amazed at how far they had gone in their blindness. Inez and Durant continued to play. I was told that after returning from Germany, they tried to get a job several times, but did not stay anywhere for a long time. The debts were growing. The parents tried to support them for a while, but eventually there were no more resources left. Aunt Susan told me that they lost their house a few months ago. The very house where I spent my childhood. They moved into a rented apartment on the outskirts of the city, she sighed when we met for coffee. I nodded. I already knew about it. How are they? What do you think? Susan squeezed the cup in her hands. They're ashes. They think you betrayed your family. I chuckled. Of course they do. Don't you feel guilty? I met her eyes. No. And it was true. Over the past year, I've learned one important lesson. People who refuse to accept their responsibility will always find someone to blame. In their eyes, I became a convenient target. They couldn't blame themselves, because that would mean admitting that they had ruined their own lives. It was easier to make me feel guilty. Aunt Susan shook her head. I still can't believe that Inez went down this path. She always seems so, right. We see in people what we want to see, I replied quietly. She sighed. Anyway, I think you did the right thing. But Mom. She's still hoping you'll change your mind. I shook my head. I won't change my mind. Life was moving forward. I got a promotion at work. I changed the apartment to a spacious, bright one with a view of the park. She made new friends, became interested in yoga, and continued to practice pottery. I no longer woke up in the morning with an alarming weight on my chest. She no longer checked her phone, waiting for another accusatory message. I no longer found myself making excuses for my own well-being. I was just living. And that was enough. It's been a year and a half since I last sat at the same table with my family. Since that dinner when I was kicked out of the house. From the moment I made a decision that changed not only my relationship with my family, but my whole life. Ines and Durant officially declared themselves bankrupt. After losing their home, they moved into a small apartment in a not very good area of the city. The last I heard, they finally agreed to attend anonymous player meetings, although they did so only when there was nowhere else to retreat to. Durant's sister, Vanna, told me that their struggle was not easy. They live on the same day, she confessed to me recently. They have frequent breakdowns, but there are also small steps forward. I listened, but I didn't feel like intervening. I was no longer their lifeline. The parents also faced reality. They could no longer afford the lifestyle they were used to. They had to move to a smaller house. Both took part-time jobs to replenish their reduced retirement savings. I wasn't happy about their difficulties. But I knew it was their own path, their choice, their consequences. Your mom asked about you at church, Aunt Susan told me during a recent phone conversation. Really? I was surprised. Yes, my aunt paused. She misses you. I gritted my teeth. I miss her too. These words came more difficult to me than I expected. But I can't go back to the way it was, I added, struggling to find the words. And it was true. I missed my family. But not for the people they turned into when money got involved. I missed Sunday dinners, which were just dinners, not a hidden commitment. I missed my younger sister, who used to call me for advice on anything. I missed my parents, who were proud of me for who I was, not for what I could give them. But I didn't miss feeling guilty. I didn't miss the manipulations, the constant demands disguised as requests. I didn't miss feeling like I was being used, like I was just a wallet with legs, an ATM that could be condemned if it suddenly stopped giving out money. I didn't miss how my generosity was taken for granted and then turned into my commitment. My life has changed in unexpected ways since I established boundaries with my family. I focused on myself. I moved on in my career because now all my energy was going to professional growth, not endless family dramas. I strengthened friendships that I had previously put aside because all my attention was focused on fulfilling other people's expectations. I even started dating again, something I didn't have time for when every minute of my free time was spent meeting other people's needs. And I was happy. For real. And then, last week, I got a letter from my mom. Not an email, not a message, but a real, handwritten paper letter. That was something new. I held the envelope in my hands, wondering for a long time whether it was worth opening it. All the previous attempts to contact me came down to requests. Felisa, help us. Felisa, you have to. Felisa, how can you do this to your family? But this time it was something else. An apology. Not perfectly worded, still partially justifying her actions, but an apology nonetheless. We were wrong, Mom wrote. We took advantage of your generosity and lost sight of what is really important. We've lost you. I read those words over and over again. I didn't answer right away. I took my time. Now I knew that I could love my family without letting them destroy my boundaries. That I can take care of them, but not be responsible for them. I was sorting through old photos last night. And I found one from that last Thanksgiving. We all looked happy. We were planning our European adventure, not knowing how it would turn out. I looked at my past self, smiling naively at the camera, still believing that love and money can coexist without conflict. Sometimes I wondered, What would have happened if I had given up then? If I had paid for that trip? Would it have prevented a disaster at the casino? Or would it just be another step in the chain of connivance that led us to the same result? But then I remembered what the therapist had told me. You are not responsible for other people's choices. You can only be responsible for your own. So that's exactly what I was doing. I made my own choice. She lived her own life. And I found peace in the realization that sometimes the best way to help those you love is to stop protecting them from the consequences of their own actions. Now the money that I used to send to my parents goes to my own pension fund. And to a charity that helps families affected by gambling addiction. Sometimes the best way to help others is to make sure that you yourself are standing on solid ground. Write a comment on what you think about this story and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like it. See you soon.